to date, and then by the year 2039, we will receive 6.7 million.
6.2.
6.2 million. Thank you. So with that, Chairwoman, if you'd like the presenters to proceed.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having us. As Scott said, I'm Jill Rushing, and this is Elizabeth Brewington, and we're with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, here to just share a brief bit about the opioid settlements in North Carolina. So before we get started on the settlements themselves, I want to tell you about our opioid settlement technical assistant team, or OSTAT, which we lovingly refer to ourselves as. Our role really is to improve the health of North Carolina's counties across the state. And we do this through technical assistance, outreach, education, training, and collaboration, and really want to help local governments, counties, and municipalities as they're looking to plan for and spend opioid use dollars, opioid settlement dollars. So data, there are 11 North Carolinians that die each and every day because of drug overdose. 8 of those deaths are due to opioids. And that means that if we look back to the year 2000, that 32,000 North Carolinians have died of drug overdose in our state. And all of you probably have people in your lives, friends, family that have been impacted by this. So it certainly is a major issue in our state and across the nation. So here are overdose deaths in Vance County, and you can see that the trend over time is that those are increasing. As Scott mentioned, there is funding coming to all North Carolina counties, and we'll get into Vance specific in just a bit, but across North Carolina, 1.5 billion with a B dollars will be coming to our state. And that's really across 3 different groups. So one is the bankruptcies, one is wave 1, which involves the manufacturers and the distributors like Johnson & Johnson and Cardinal. And then the most recent wave of funding is wave 2. And that's really looking at the pharmacies. So CVS, Walgreens, Walmart. And guiding principles for this work, spending the money to save lives. So this funding is not for filling potholes or paving roads. This is really about using the funds to save lives. Using evidence and data to guide the spending. We want to invest in prevention. We want to focus on equity. And along with that, we want to ensure that we're being transparent and accountable. One special thing, there are many special things about North Carolina, but one special thing with regard to opioid settlement funds is that in North Carolina, 15% is going to the state, and the rest of the funding, the rest of that 1.5 billion is coming to local governments, coming to counties and municipalities. And that makes North Carolina really, really unique and really well positioned to make good use of the funds. Again, as Scott mentioned, here is information about Vance. So a little over $6.2 million over, we used to say 18 years, over the next 17 years now. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Elizabeth, who's going to talk about the types of things that can be done with that opioid settlement funding.
And that 6.2 is inclusive of both settlements,
Both
Yes.
ways.
and there's still a third one pending, correct?
Purdue is still pending, and so there's potential for more funding to come in, but you're guaranteed that 6.2 million.
Okay.
So North Carolina is governed by the memorandum of agreement, and we like to say that it is a menu of options of how you can spend the funds. And there's 2 options that you can take. There's option A, or Exhibit A, which is a list of high impact evidence-based strategies that you can invest the funds in immediately. The second option is Exhibit B, which needs to be unlocked by doing a collaborative strategic planning process that is very prescribed and outlined in Exhibit C. Once you've gone through that collaborative strategic planning process, you can unlock the options in option B. We like to describe the collaborative strategic planning process as a big funnel. You start with the entire universe of ideas. What do we want our county to look like after 18 years with these opioid settlement funds, and then eventually filter down into specific strategies that you want to invest in. You can do option A and option B, or option B and option A. You can do either one, but option B does have the extra requirement of the collaborative strategic planning process. So the 12 strategies outlined in option A, there's a lot to do here. The first is collaborative strategic planning, and it goes all the way through reentry. And I'm going to touch on each one of these strategies briefly. So like I mentioned, this first strategy is collaborative strategic planning. Most of the counties are actually investing in the collaborative strategic planning strategy with their opioid settlement funds. They're using this as a way to hire people to be in charge of what does the county's opioid settlement fund process look like. And it's really kind of an a la carte way for you to figure out what kind of strategic planning you want to do. Strategy number 2 is evidence-based treatment. And this is very specifically defined as the American Society of Addiction Medicine's definition of treatment. So that is medications for opioid use disorder. So methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. And the goal of this strategy is to increase access to this medication everywhere you can possibly get it. Strategies 3 through 5 are all focused on recovery support, recovery housing, and employment. And these are making sure that we can connect people to care and supports, making sure that we kind of hit those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, making sure that people have some shelter and security and connection to their community. The 6th strategy is early intervention. It is also very narrowly defined. It is to work with children who are already showing signs of struggle. We know that mental health concerns often show up first before drug use in kids. And so it's making sure that we are working with those kids who are already showing signs of mental health concerns and wrapping them around with all the love and care and support, and training the adults to recognize those signs of struggle. The 7th strategy is naloxone distribution. Naloxone, or Narcan, is the overdose reversal medication and is associated with a 50% drop in overdose fatalities when it is widely distributed. And so we're making sure that anywhere and everyone can access this medication. Number 8 is post-overdose response teams, or also known as quick response teams or rapid response teams. These teams are to make sure to follow up and visit with somebody in the key 24 to 72 hour period after they are overdosed and connect them with resources. So make sure that they have access to medication if they need it, like naloxone, or get them connected to different areas in the community. Number 9 is a syringe service program. They've been legalized in North Carolina since 2016, and they are kind of a hub in the community to connect people to care. And the CDC has shown that people who engage in a syringe service program are 5 to 7 times more likely to enter treatment. Number 10, I'm going to pass it to Jill.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So the last 3 that we're going to talk about, the last 3 of those high impact evidence-based strategies that are part of option A are all justice involved. And you'll see this as we go through them. So 10 is really about diversion. So providing an alternative to incarceration, and that can be pre-arrest programs, post-arrest programs, or pre-trial services. Elizabeth mentioned the 3 medicines that are used for medications for opioid use disorders. And if folks are coming into your jails, you can support them if they have opioid use disorder. You can support them by providing those medicines with opioid settlement funds. An important note on that is the relationship to the Americans with Disabilities Act and the MOUD in jails. This is from the federal DOJ, so United States Department of Justice. They issued guidance in 2022 about the provision of MOUD in jails and said that if there was a situation where a person was incarcerated and they were taking MOUD that had been prescribed before they became detained, that if the jail had a blanket policy prohibiting the use of MOUD, MOUD, that would be a violation of the Americans with Disability Act or ADA. And so that's an important thing to note, and important for you all to know that opioid settlement funds can be used to support MOUD in jails. And our last one of those 12 high impact strategies is reentry program. So Elizabeth often says, and it's talked about in harm reduction world, that the opposite of addiction is what?
Isn't abstinence, it's connection.
Yeah. It's about connection. And so that's what this number 12 is about. You have folks who are leaving jails and prisons. And so it's about connecting them to the supports and services they need to be successful once they're out of jail or prison. And so community health workers can help with this. Peer supports can help with this. It's about the same services that Elizabeth mentioned in 3 that are recovery support services. These are the same types of services just for folks that are leaving our jails and prisons. Okay. So that's it for the strategies. Just another bit about our team. If you all get into this work and want some help, please think of us as an extension of yourselves. We are so proud to be with North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. It's a great organization, and we are your staff as well. And we can help with strategic action planning, help with those connections to other counties that may be doing work that you're interested in finding out more about. And then we can help with program implementation as well. It is reporting season. All local governments are required to turn in their annual financial report and annual impact report, and we can help with those kinds of things too. So we're here. Quickly, some resources that we all want you to know about. The first is Core NC, an amazing repository of information on strategy specific hints and toolkits, as well as the place local governments will go to find out about the reporting requirements and use that online portal to submit the report. So Core NC is really important to know about.
And where that payment schedule is found, if you're interested in learning more.
Great, thank you. Another partner who has a great website, of course, in the North Carolina Department of Justice. If you're curious about the real fine details of the Memorandum of Agreement, there are tons of resources and FAQs on the DOJ site. And then I'm a little fond of our site, Association of County Commissioners. You have both our webpage and our group email address. And the last is our partners at North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, who we could not do this work without. At the state level, there's the Opioid and Substance Use Action Plan. And so they're kind of working on things at the state level. It is a wonderful resource if you're wanting to know about Vance County information. You can go onto that site and find out specific information for your county. It's a great resource. And then Elizabeth just mentioned this. If you're interested to see what other local governments have signed on to spend funding on, within Core NC, there's this wonderful data display where you can go and say you're interested in doing a syringe service program or reentry program. You can go to the site and find out what other counties have also assigned funding to those particular strategies. And that's it. Thank you all so much for your time, and we're available if you have questions. And if there are no questions right at this moment, please reach out to us anytime in the future.
All right. Thank you very much. You all have cards.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. We want to thank you all for coming. We do appreciate all the information that you've given us. I'm pretty sure that after reviewing the packet, if any other commissioners have any other questions, we'll be reaching out to you all with any further questions as we go forward and try to implement the use of our opioid funds. So far, we have not actually implemented any specific programs, so that's gonna be projects that we're gonna be working towards in the future. And if we need any assistance, we're glad to see that you all are available, not only to answer questions for us, but also give us direction if needed, you know, as to which would be the best option to take, you know, for the county and the county our size, and based on our population, not only the need that exists in the county to help with the particular problem of opioid addiction and opioid treatment. So we do appreciate it.
Madam Chairwoman, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
But are there any timetables when a county jurisdiction, whether city or county, have to take certain actions? Or is,
In terms of spending or in terms of like reporting?
well, reporting, I understand that this is our annual meeting for
Mhm.
reporting purposes, but for spending, is there timetables moving forward?
No, you do not have to spend the funds in the year you receive them. You can carry them over and spend them at another point. I would recommend you do spend them at some point, but you do not have to spend them on any sort of timetable.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
The finance director just wanted me to remind the board that our opioid funds are in a separate revenue fund, separate and apart from the general fund, so they're segregated per se.
And next on our agenda is discussion on the creation of an opioid task force, so that we can determine some of the ways, what options we have in terms of the use of the funds that we do have. As our county manager stated and Ms. Bigelow agreed with, we do have funds that's in a special account. And it is a separate account that's separate from our other funds that we do have. And so we do want, you know, we don't want to sit on it, you know, especially with the need that exists in Vance County. We want to go ahead and try to utilize it so we can better serve our community. So one of the options that has been discussed, although not voted on yet, is the creation of the opioid task force, so that we can explore the information we do have, the options, consult with other agencies that the opioid addiction has impacted, such as the police, the sheriff, and any other agencies, either private or quasi-government, which has information that may be beneficial to us when we decide how we want to spend the funds. I think, you know, our one of our main LMEs that provide services is VIA. We've heard from VIA. We've heard from Lisa Blackman from the health department. I think another gentleman, he came and presented at our last session. So in my opinion, I think creating an opioid task force would be beneficial, you know, for us in determining how to go forward and how to utilize these funds. The county has funds and also the city has funds. So I think we need to collaborate with them to see what they're going to be doing with their funds, and maybe, you know, to see whether or not we intend to work separately, independently, or if we can maybe do a unified collaboration with them to see if we can better serve our community in terms of the opioid, in terms of dealing with the opioid crisis that existed, and the overall drug prevention that we need to put in place. So if anyone else have any opinions, you know, please feel free to speak up.
I think you hit the main players, the city, the county, the health department, VIA. Those players are all, they're deeply engaged in the process here, and need to be a part probably of our process.
Okay, does anyone have any suggestions or would like to discuss in terms of the task force? I know, you know, we just stated, you know, different stakeholders and partners that we can partner with in terms of try to come up with various ways in which to utilize these funds. So does anyone else, because we have different, when you're talking about treating opioid addictions, there's different agencies that plays a part. Ms. Blackner was here from the health department. I'm pretty sure she could give us some insight about how the health department plays a part. You have separate counseling services that with licensed clinical social workers and addiction specialists that deal with treating the public. Excuse me, Lisa Harrison, I'm sorry. And there's other agencies here in Vance County that also provide services either through programs such as treating people with, I believe, I just want to make sure I get it right. The programs that provides alternative treatments. See. Because I know some people actually go and get injections. Can you tell me what I'm referring to? When they go,
MAP
Right.
programs.
The what?
MAP
MAP programs.
programs.
yeah,
So there's
medications.
other programs such as that, that deals with that as well. So we need to decide, whether or not we're gonna go with a major, organization that provides services, whether we want to utilize several smaller, agencies as well as going with, some of the larger services, just basically how we want to go about it and what's one of the, better ways to go about it, whether or not we want to partner with, law enforcement, to come up with, other alternatives, because there is, agencies that, deal with, what's it, Noxalon,
Naloxone.
the
Yeah.
naloxone,
Mhm.
distribution, because a lot of times when a law enforcement is called to the scene or EMS is called to the scene and the person is in current crisis, a lot of times you need to act immediately to circumvent where they are in the overdose process. So it's different things that we need to consider before we want to expend, all of our funds. And so I think a task force, trying to go ahead and create one would be a good idea at this time, to go ahead and start that process and decide who we want to actually take part on any kind of task force, or whether or not we want to leave it with the commissioners, whether or not we want to have a special committee of commissioners, just how we want to do it. And I think, that was one of the reasons why it's on the agenda today, so we can actually start the conversation.
Would it be rude in my asking, since Lisa deals with so much of the healthcare issues in the community, to give us some insight, Lisa?
Yes, sir. I'd be glad to, Madam Chairwoman and County Commissioners. Thank you just for the opportunity to be here today with some of my colleagues. I am certainly familiar with this work since 2015. The Health Department has received 11 different grants or initiatives. Some is provided by counties across the Stepping Up initiative to be able to address mental health and substance use treatment. So we're lucky that we have Dr. Shauna Guthrie as our medical director at the Health Department. And one of her projects in 2015, when she started with us as medical director, was to do a leadership program at the Academy of Family Physicians. And she started medication for opioid use disorder in the health department as a new service along with primary care by 2016. So we were one of the first providers of that service. And then through her work with jails and through our work with the Stepping Up initiative across 5 counties, Granville, Vance, Halifax, Franklin, and Warren, we've really had a lot of important conversation that, at least for me, gets a lot at that #1 collaborative strategic planning, where we've listened to emergency management personnel and law enforcement and behavioral health specialists. And Commissioner Brummett, along with VIA's Elliott Clark, prior to that, he was with Cardinal Innovations. We've done the Stepping Up initiative for about 7 years now and had those sort of strategic conversations on what are we seeing on the ground? what are the biggest challenges and where do we need to invest some funds to make sure that we're doing the treatment and the evidence-based strategies that this initiative also asks of us. So there's certainly synergies. I'm not here to suggest the Stepping Up initiative takes the place of what you're suggesting, Madam Chair. I think an opioid task force is a great idea. Glad to serve on that with my colleagues here in the room and others. But I do think a lot of legwork has been accomplished, which is exciting. And so Carl is with me today. Dr. Carl Johnson is both with UNC Chapel Hill School of Public Health and the Health Department, has a hybrid sort of connection with us to help us sort of chart and visualize all the different initiatives we have. So currently, the Health Department participates in the Stepping Up initiative across the 5 counties. We have something called Community Linkages to Care, which is money that comes from the CDC to the state of North Carolina to communities to be able to distribute naloxone. And so we partner with the Harm Reduction Coalition to do mobile syringe exchange and naloxone distribution, which is super helpful because then it's not a government entity providing those services. It is a not-for-profit who is out in the community providing those services that we support. Then we also have a new grant from HRSA. That's a federal level administration that just announced a few weeks ago. Our Board of Health and Commissioner Kelly will officially decide whether or not to accept those funds at our next Board of Health meeting in October. But that is a 4-year grant to address substance use disorder and treatment and behavioral health interventions for youth in our school systems. So the partnerships and the funding and the work is happening in lots of different areas. And I do have a lot of updates and reports for that first task force meeting. I could tell you what we are doing along these 12 different levels of intervention and outreach, because there's definitely a lot happening and I know it's hard to keep up with all of it, but we have some exciting grant funded projects, some new staff and a medical director who really supports this work. So I don't want to keep going too long, but is there anything more specifically I can help answer with regard to that? I do want to thank our friends at the County Commissioners Association who we have collaborated on a number of things and they invited us to be part of the National Association of County Officials Opioid Leadership Network. So Carl just got back from Wisconsin a few weeks ago where he heard from some of the best practices across the nation and bright spots about this kind of work. So I can give you expertise, experience, and connections to the work already happening so that at least we feel like we've got the wind in our sails when we get the task force off the ground.
Okay, anybody have any
So
questions?
let me ask you, Madam Chair. I'll keep asking myself. I think we may need this task force, but what is the purpose of the task force? Is it to advise this board on how to use the funds that we're going to get? So that means the task force will go out and do some investigation or research or consultation with our Department of Health and all of these grants that they have and all this sort of thing. So the composition of that task force, then what do you envision to be the size of that task force? Is this going to be a 3-person task force or 4-person? I mean, I'm trying to get in my head
Well,
what this task force is going to look like and what it's going to do. Is it going to go out to these different agencies like the one Lisa has, this Granville County Health stuff? Or what? What exactly is going to be? And then come back to the board and say, we recommend you take this $1 million of this and do this, these strategies that I saw in this sheet over here. Which one of those we're going to recommend? Is that the idea of the task force?
well, I guess we may not even call it a task force per se. It was more so of coming up with the different options that's going to be available to us as commissioners to see which ones in terms of distribution of the funds, which agencies that we would like to fund, with these agencies. Of course, there's different agencies that's requesting these funds, but we want to make sure that the funds are going to be distributed in such a way that it's going to be effective and it's going to have a long arm reach in terms of the community It may not necessarily all go to one agency. You know, different agencies have their own task force that they put together and started their own task force, however, they would like to see the funds distributed, but then there's other agencies that may not have presented themselves to us, in which we may think that they are doing a positive action towards opioid addiction in the community. We might like to fund them. So I think as a board, we need to know what's out there, not just hearing from a limited amount of sources, but being able to get information from various sources to determine how we want to
So this,
spend this money.
to use a different term, this task force is almost like an ad hoc committee,
Yes,
is what it really
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
It's
that's
an
what-
ad hoc committee
right,
that we would have our board right now. And so you could establish an ad hoc committee,
correct,
appoint 3 of us to that committee,
right,
and then that committee's job is to do what you're talking about.
right. That's sort of what I had in mind.
That's what it sounds
Right.
like to me.
Ideally, to me, the committee would be comprised of commissioners,
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
the health department, probably VIA, the city. if the
Leo would
city-
be on that
if the
committee
city-
because he's associated with the health department. You would be on that committee because you're, you're associated with VIA. So we may need one other person on this committee. It sounds like to me an ad hoc committee.
Yeah.
And then we go forward.
And then the city's involvement, if possibly the city would want, if the city wants to do this in a cooperative manner, then we may choose to have some representation from the city with city councilman and so forth. And like I said, the stepping up is actually doing a whole lot of these things already. We're using maintenance of effort monies from VIA that the county provides to do some of these things in all 5 of the counties. The program, the Stepping Up program that we have regionally here is a nationally recognized program that we developed. And so it's the big thing is evidence-based. Since the announcement, this monies have come out, there've been a lot of pop-up companies
I'm sure they
that, that want to be a part of sharing the money. And so we need to be careful as we go through this process that we use evidence-based practices and try to maximize the use of money for our citizens.
So I suggest,
Okay.
Madam Chairman.
And
we
rather
set
you
up
see
a-
us
a
doing
committee,
well,
Well,
3 people. Let's
my
go.
suggestion is having a committee made of commissioners. Now, if you want to go out and add, another type of committee that made up of those individuals that can give information back to the committee as we decide what recommendations we want to follow, we can do that. But putting specific agencies on there, I'm not in favor of that. For one, you got VIA. Yes, that's our LME, they're our LME. But then again, there's other agencies out there. We may not choose to give all of our funding to one person. And I think somebody directly involved where there's a potential conflict of interest is not in the best interest of this committee, where somebody can say, oh, they just favored this company over this other company. I want to, I'm just gonna be honest, I want to hear about other agencies. I've heard positive things about this evidence-based or whatever, but I've heard negative things as well. I have done some research and found out about agencies that exist that's supposed to be providing these so-called programs that are not doing what they're supposed to do, but they have a contract with VIA. And so my thing is, before we started pouring this money into certain agencies that people are coming back and saying are not necessarily providing the services in which they are representing their services, we need to look into that to make sure we're actually funding different agencies that are providing the so-called services in which they're representing.
Yeah, I fully
That if that's
concur.
the best.
I fully concur in
if
that.
that's the
And-
best
And my question is,
option.
would you like to serve with that committee?
I think at this time, what this meeting was about was to determine if we were actually going to have a committee. And then at that time, as the chair, as I do for other committees, I would be appointing people.
No, I'm talking about the ad hoc committee that this board would form to do what you just said.
And as I
like
stated,
what you
if we-
just said.
First of
And
all, we
so-
need to determine if we're going to actually have a committee. And then at that time, then I would do appointments for that committee as I did with the other committee,
I'm
properties,
there.
the human resources, the education, the other committees that we have. That would be my recommendation.
I think.
So you want a motion to that effect? That we establish an ad hoc committee?
She has the authority to appoint committee.
Yeah,
without
I
action
know
of the
that.
board.
She has the appointment to do that.
Okay, motion has been made that we create an ad hoc committee of commissioners to determine how the opioid funds will be
dispersed.
used. It's
Yeah.
been made by
Taylor.
Commissioner Taylor, seconded by Commissioner Austin. All those in favor?
We have a question.
Yes, discussion.
I wanted to ask and everything in terms of we're discussing in our committee. I want to hear what the city is considering, you know, because it's a joint thing. When I think of what's been happening, I also think of Henderson and Vance County as one. I think of us doing things together, not separately and everything. What direction is the city considering?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The city, back when the settlement started, we decided to get involved as well. And we're going to receive, give or take, just under $400,000. I think it's about $375,000. And my reason for being here, I mean, we've worked together on intergovernmental committees before on a lot of different things. And if it makes sense from our part, you know, we're not a human services agency, although sometimes we touch those things, but the county with social services, you know, mental health, all the other things that you all do. I think it makes sense that maybe we utilize our funds and leverage and do something maybe collaboratively, you know, that benefits, that will certainly benefit the citizens of the city of Henderson. But I think our council would be more than glad if there was a committee, maybe looking at maybe appointing a couple of people, maybe to serve on maybe some type of joint committee. I wouldn't preclude you all from going ahead and maybe setting up your ad hoc, but let me go back to the council and see, we've got some people on city council currently. I don't know if they'll be there after October, but have been very active, I think, in this process as well. And I think you would find that they would want to be engaged. So I think maybe as a best practice, we may want to look at maybe working together, because maybe we could leverage more resources also for the citizens within the city, because Henderson is in Vance County. So I'm sure you're looking to utilize those resources throughout the county, which also includes the city.
My next thing I wanted to, I'm thinking through this and everything in terms of Lisa, and in terms of looking at ad hoc committee. I like the idea in terms of we form an advisory committee, but you know, we've had people that come to us, parents that have been affected by the drugs and things. I don't think we should have any committee that we do not have some representation from families or someone that's been affected by the opioid crisis and everything. So I don't know how we can incorporate, if you have an ad hoc committee, we have an ad hoc committee. I'd like to see some participation on those committees from families that's been affected, because some of them have lost their children. They've appeared before us looking for answers and questions as to how to deal with it. And I think they have a deep commitment in terms of wanting to be involved in how we move forward, so that they don't lose so they don't see other family members losing someone to this drug situation and everything. So I'm for committee, I'm for ad hoc, but I'd like to see on those committees some involvement from people that have been affected by this, and especially parents.
Madam Chair, I think on that, and also what our city manager is saying is, in the past, we set our committee, he sets his committee, and then we cooperate and meet together. Likewise, it would be up to these committees to bring in the health department and whatever other agencies we need to as part of our process. But the committee would be,
I want parents involved.
yes, we need to have peer involvement, that kind of
Okay,
thing, yes.
okay, no problem with that, okay,
That's what I would suggest as far as part of our work.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say that whatever this committee is, it needs to be very strategic in terms of identifying what services we want to carry out. And I think where the citizens fit into this is that, you know, you hold another meeting like this and you invite them to come in and provide the feedback that you're talking about, Commissioner Kelly. I don't know that it necessarily requires that they have to serve on the committee,
Okay.
but I think they should have a voice.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that when the committee meets, it would be publicized, and then you would invite families who've been impacted by this to come to the committee, and present their concerns and obligations for the committee to take under consideration. That's the way I see that, as opposed to them being on the committee. That's part of the committee's investigative procedures, to invite them to meetings to do that.
Another thing we've seen in other counties is sending out a survey to the public, talking about these different strategies and what they would prioritize spending for. And so that would be another way to get that public impact of people who've been affected by this.
Okay, and that's something that we could reach out to you all to assist with, if that was one of the options that we decided to undertake.
Okay.
And I like the idea of the city having its committee
Mhm.
and us having our committee, because they answer to a different board as to how they might want to distribute that $367 or $400,000 they're gonna get. And our board may have a different opinion of that. And we get together, those two boards, and decide, what's the best path forward. So again,
Maybe we can do something collective.
yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Or independent.
The only thing that I would ask is, as far as we're concerned, we still have our intergovernmental committee, but I was informed that the city no longer has theirs. Do you all still have a intergovernmental committee set up whereby you can collaborate with us?
But we're not talking about an intergovernmental committee.
What we've done in the last year or so is that some of our other committees have been appropriate, but it won't be a problem to have.
Okay.
that
Okay,
structure.
okay, all right, thank you. Just as we stated in the past, we have been able to work together in that capacity, because that was one of the things we did with broadband. We had our own committee. The city had its committee. We had a
And
joint
the two of
committee
them
because
can
we
meet.
had some joint projects that we
Right.
wanted to work together. And then we worked as a group, because I was on that committee, and we did meet with the city officials, and that was one of the things we did decide was to put the broadband downtown, where we worked together, and we both agreed for each entity to provide funding together so that we can make it work. And I think we, may be able to do it in such a way so that we can make this work. So it's not only going to benefit the city, but the county as well, because it is a countywide problem that it needs to be resolved, with everything that we have, because it's widespread. And like Leo said, a lot of parents are hurt. There's a lot of individuals hurt, and a lot of agencies are stressed in terms of funding and resources. So we just want to make sure that, because we have this responsibility, that we're going to do the best thing we can for all involved. Okay, so now it's time to vote. All those in favor of establishing the committee, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it by unanimous vote. Okay, the next thing on our agenda was the creation of a violent crime task force. And again, we're looking at something very similar. I on the way to our meeting, our conference, I was in the airport trying to catch the plane. I got a call from a citizen who didn't want to get off the phone because he's very upset because he had been in a situation where he was present for a violent shooting that had happened near the US Postal Service and also near our hospital. And I basically informed him that we're going to be looking at that, once we get back from the conference, because we do, we have a serious problem now that's creating to our jail overcrowding situation. So it's something that we need to look at in terms of what we can do as a county board to see if we can assist in helping Vance County in terms of trying to come up with different options in which we have available so that we can sort of combat that violent crime. So it's up to the board, to decide whether or not we want to look at another committee to see whether or not we can try to come up with some alternatives that we may not have in place in Vance County that we possibly, can implement so that we can assist with that problem as well. There's a lot of distressed parents because, their children or themselves have been the victim as a result of violent crime. There's been a lot of murders that has happened. We have an overcrowding situation in terms of homicide cases pending in our county, that's yet to be resolved. So, that was another suggestion that I had, that we discuss it to see, this is our work session, to see whether or not we want to do anything about trying to, come together as a board to see if there's something that we can do. That person called me because they wanted the county to do something, and so even though at the time, the incidents he was stating actually happening in the city, he was assistant on the county doing something to help with these issues as well. So I wanted to bring it before the committee, before the board, to see whether or not we want to try to form any kind of task force to see if there's something that maybe we can do.
I think that gentleman called all the commissioners. And he spoke for a long time, to each of us. To me, that's the thing, and he was very passionate about being a part of the process. So to me, that's something that it ought to be a community task force with community stakeholders. We need the Henderson Police Department involved. We need the sheriff's office involved. We need the DA involved. We need a number of different organizations throughout the county that support the violence and to support our youth justice programs, our court systems. All of those things need to come together to be part of this task force.
Yeah, I agree with that. So how do you all
Well, we
feel?
have something called Crime Stoppers.
They need to be there too.
Say again?
So they need to be there too.
I didn't hear you.
They need to be there too.
Yeah, I mean,
Just don't leave it up to them.
is this something we could get them to push and we support?
Mhm.
If they could-
Crime Stoppers have been around. I'm not negating anything that they're doing, but they've been around a long time. So what I want to do is put together a task force so we can look at whether other options that may be available, because a lot of times it's about being able to work together. Not only Crime Stoppers, just as that's an independent agency, but also mainly trying to get some input from our sheriff's department. People want answers. People want answers and people want action. And so we need to try to come together as a community, because we want to make Vance County a safe place in which individuals feel comfortable, where they can come home late at night, get out of their car and know that they're not going to be robbed, or they come home and their house hadn't been broken into. They want to feel safe. And I think that was one of the things this individual that called each of us was passionate about, because he was upset about the shooting that was going on, because he said his life was in danger. So there's a lot of people feel the exact same way. They don't feel safe. And that's not to say that the police are not doing their job or the sheriff not doing their job, because I think both agencies are overworked. And we need to come up with other options to see if there's anything. Yeah, I'm not saying that there is a solution, but at least try to come together as a community so everybody can work together, because certain entities may not be working with other entities, but we need to bring everyone to the table so that we can sit down and say, how can we help Vance County be a place where our children can play outside, they can feel safe, they can go to the playground, no one is gonna be trying to do anything harmful for them. We just need a safe environment in which we can live here in Vance County. And so we need to really just have that discussion whereby we can work together to try to come up with some kind of solution that's going to help the problem, because there is a problem.
Can I, Terrell, correct me if I'm not wrong. I want to say the rec department one time through Kendrick Van, as well as, what's the young lady who was, my son worked with Ruth Service, Youth Services. And they started, because I went to several meetings, they started a session, because I went to one at Eden Johnson, whereby they brought in the public and they had talk sessions. I don't know where that ever went or where that ever got to. I mean, what's the young lady's name now?
Chantel Hargrove.
Chantel Hargrove started discussion. So I remember Miss Baskerville, Sarah Baskerville being there and discussing about some of the positive things that young African-American males were doing. I think she highlighted some students that had done extremely well that may wind up be an inspiration for young African-American males in the community that she shared with. But there were several speakers that talked, but I don't know where that ever got, where did that ever go? Because I know my son Greg was involved with it before he left.
Certainly. Well, our recreation department, they administer the youth services program for the county, which includes, I think, a youth court and a lot of programs they do. What you're referring to is, I think it was a series of barbershop talks they were doing.
Yeah.
And they decided to do one large one, and it was at the
Dean Johnson,
Johnson Gym.
right.
And that type of programming is still available, but we hadn't done, as far as I know, we haven't recently done
I
any of
think
those.
COVID must have come in.
Well,
It was before
Well-
COVID or it was after COVID?
well, some of it was pre and after COVID.
Okay.
But we do have a public safety committee, the city does, that meets. One of the things we did a year ago, and Lisa, and they were involved in this, is that we actually passed a resolution declaring gun violence
As a public health?
as a public health issue. So that was done. We've also partnered with North Carolina Central University, along with 4 other municipalities, where there was a grant submitted to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. My understanding is that we haven't been told that we weren't funded, but we hadn't received notification, but that should have happened. It should be happening around now, but that would provide some additional resources to come into the community to help address gun violence in our community. And so you heard from the police chief last week at the state of the city police department. When I first heard that was occurring, I was kind of wondering why they didn't do just the state of law enforcement and do city and county together. I can see, their roles are different as it relates to addressing, but we all want the same thing, which is making a safer community. And so I think there's some other parties that are involved when you start talking about the DA's office, and there are so many pieces to this, and I'm going to go sit down because we could talk about this all day, but I would say that the city would be cooperative in working with you all on some type of, we don't have what I would say, a standing task force or something that's sort of perpetual beyond the committee we put together for the grant. Your former county manager, I think, wrote a letter of support, I think, for that grant application, or it came from the chairman. I'm not sure, woman, I'm not sure, but certainly I think there's some ways that we could, just like we're talking about the opioid epidemic, I think there's some ways that we can address the violence in our communities together as well.
Okay, that sounds great.
I would think that more lighting and more cameras would help. If there were more cameras out there and more lighting out there, then that would help tremendously because.
Well, I would say, in response to what Terrell said, they have a committee with the city, and I think we should have a light committee with the county, whether or not we want to do it separately, or we can always do it through the public safety committee, since we already have a committee formed.
Yeah.
And make that an aspect of
The
the
two
public
to get
safety,
together.
working with, actually having a component for the violent crime. For violent crime, with the emphasis on that, because I think when Mr. Waters spoke, one of the questions, I think you may have come from Mr. Austin, he asked, are you talking to the sheriff? He said no. And, vice versa, I believe people need to talk, regardless of what may be going on, conversation needs to be had, because until we can communicate one with another to try to come up with some options and solutions, the problem is going to remain. And I think it's a major problem. A lot of people don't feel safe. A lot of people who normally wouldn't carry guns, they're carrying guns because they think somebody's gonna be shooting at them, and they want to have self-defense. The law has undergone some changes about what is required for gun permits and what's not required. So I think it's something as a board that, since we have gotten feedback from the public regarding this, that we need to do something, as a committee. Whether we go through public safety or we form a new committee, that's up to the board.
Public safety's adequate to do that.
Is that?
I think the public safety committee's adequate. to do that.
Okay, so is it the consensus of the members here that we just go through the public safety committee rather than form a new committee? I mean,
Put it on there and start some conversation jointly. with
Well, let's
the
put it
citizens.
this way, we can start there.
excuse,
I'm sorry, we could definitely bring them together. Both are public safety committees, not the different.
okay,
We can start there, then, go further if we think we have to, but that's a good starting.
okay, so, does someone want to make a, do we need a motion to
No.
refer it?
We're not
Okay.
doing that, no action.
Okay. So we won't take any action on the creation of a separate. What we'll do is refer this matter to the our public safety committee, which is already established with Commissioner Brumett, Commissioner Austin, and Commissioner Faines. And then we'll see, what recommendations you can bring back to the board, and then the board can take the corrective action.
If we could get staff to coordinate a joint meeting with the city public safety committee. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, but
No, go ahead.
how is this remotely gonna be possible? If we can't get the sheriff and the DA to come to the table and help with this issue for the county,
It's gonna just have to be brought forward and they're gonna have to make a decision.
they've made a decision, so it's like I have the time. So how we gonna get around it?
I think they'll both come to the table. So at least they'll send representatives that we can get some progress made.
That's the problem, right there. That's the
Yeah.
problem right there.
Yeah, because one of the things, people are gonna have to come to the table because it does impact other departments, because like, for instance, one of the things that we're having to deal with now is our jail situation and the number of violent charged offenders that exist in the jail, and making sure that they're in compliance with what the state law is. So because, again, we had Mr. Waters come, he spoke on getting them into court. We talked to, we've heard from the sheriff about the overcrowding situation. So we're gonna have to have that conversation if this is gonna work, and everybody go out to cooperate. We heard from Chief Barrows, and he was talking about some of the issues and concerns he had. Some of us attended the state of the police luncheon, and we heard some of the concerns he had, some of the things that they're doing, but everybody didn't attend. So I'm thinking we need to come together as a group and sit down and have a discussion about how we can better serve this community. That's what we owe the community, our efforts. We have to make that effort. So I think it is something that we should refer to the Public Safety Committee. I believe the committee has been established long enough that they know how to coordinate with the city of Henderson, maybe to come together, invite the sheriff to come, invite the DA to come, whether they come together. But at some point in time, we gotta all work together to make Henderson a safer and happier place to live. LaKinda and gentler Henderson, we got to do that. And if not, just for the adults, especially for the children, because they deserve that and we owe them that. Okay, we have now other business. So at this time, there's some personnel issues that we need to discuss, so we're gonna go in closed session at this time.
Madam Chair, move to go into closed session, and discuss personnel issues.
A motion has been made by Commissioner Brumett to be going to closed session, seconded by Commissioner Austin. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No opposition. So we're now in closed session.